Thank you. On behalf of the Chamber of Commerce of Ossining and the River Towns League of Women Voters, I welcome you to this candidates meeting this evening. As you know, this was intended to be a three-part meeting, and we don't know at this point whether it will be, but we will be beginning with the mayoral candidates. For those of you who don't know about the League of Women Voters, the League is a nonpartisan organization that concentrates on the issues. The League never endorses nor opposes candidates or parties. We are issue-oriented. And our whole mission in life is to promote the active and informed participation of citizens in their own government. So to that end, we have many different ways of advocating and issuing different publications like the Voter's Guide that is available to you tonight outdoors. Again, we are going to be starting with the candidates for the mayoral position. And to that end, I would like to introduce the moderator for tonight. Again, for those of you who are not familiar with the League, it is the policy of the League of Women Voters, I believe it's nationwide, that moderators never come from the same district where they would have a vote. So our moderator tonight has come to us from White Plains, and he would not be able to vote in any of the three elections, the three districts that will be in question tonight. It is my privilege to introduce him. He is the Dean of our Moderating Corps, and Paul Schwartz is a retired teacher of English and public speaking. He now devotes his time to a number of not-for-profit organizations, including the Westchester County League of Women Voters. He has been a moderator for a number of years, and for the past 4 years has been responsible for orienting and assigning moderators for all League-sponsored events in Westchester. Please welcome Paul Schwartz.
I don't always have a chair. It's really a pleasure to have a chair. Sometimes I stand the whole time. Thank you. And yeah, I've come up from White Plains, which means I'm mainly ignorant of issues in Ossining. I've tried to do a little studying, but forgive me if I'm not totally conversant in Ossining issues. Let's see if I can do this. Okay. That's good. All right. One thing I want to stress before we start is that it's important to allow candidates to make the best use of our time. So for that reason, and there are several other reasons, I will ask that you refrain from applause during each segment and wait until the end of the closing statements at the end of the segment. Today's meeting is being recorded. It will be available on public access and also on YouTube, this being 2018. Everything is on YouTube. No other use or editing of this recording is permitted. Personal video or audio recording is not permitted. That's a league policy. And that's why I was reaching in here, because my notes say, would you please make sure to silence all of your cell phones. And this is where I always try to put mine on airplane mode. All right? No sounds. All right, thank you. Tonight we will be hearing from candidates for Mayor of Ossining, hopefully also State Assembly District 95 and State Senate District 38, in that order. Ground rules. Opening statements of 1.5 minutes, then a question from the Chamber and the League. The Chamber and the League are coordinating the sponsorship of this event, followed by your questions, which have been handed in and which are, have been looked at by the table over here. If you have not done that, you could still do that. There are still slips over here you could fill out. They're going to select the questions for me to read aloud. They will choose questions which are relevant, not redundant, and covering an array of topics. Responses will be limited to 1.5 minutes. The order will rotate. After the question period, we'll have closing statements, 1 minute closing statement, in the same order as the opening statement. As moderator, I will reserve the right to allow additional rebuttal at the close if warranted by the content of a closing statement. We have our timekeepers right there, thank you very much, who will show 30 seconds and stop. We'll see, okay? So we are ready to begin. We're skipping over that page, as I think you know. And we're going to our two mayoral candidates, Victoria P. Garrity and Omar Herrera. So if they want to take their places, and we tossed a coin, and the order determined was that Mr. Herrera will begin. Again, opening statements of 1.5 minutes, and Mr. Herrera, you're on.
Thank you. So first and foremost, thank you to the League of Women Voters and Ossining Chamber of Commerce for really providing an avenue for Ossining residents to really hear their candidates and what makes them different or what makes them better. This is the only opportunity that Ossining Village residents will have to hear their two candidates. So thank you so much. Hi everyone, my name is Omar Herrera and I am a lifelong Ossining resident. I am the product of all Ossining public schools. I am the child of working class immigrants that are here today. I am a former active volunteer and first responder, the Ossining Fire Department. I'm a small business owner, as many of you know me when I had my space on Main Street. And a lot of you know me as an activist and advocate and currently one of your Ossining Village trustees. I am running for mayor because I know, I see, and I've experienced that Ossining is not being heard or served by the current administration in the current years. And as I've been connecting with voters, I can clearly see that we need to move beyond reaching people within a political party or within political influence or within political parties. It's crucial that residents understand how our village government works, how it affects them, or lack thereof, and currently we're just not doing a good job at that. We need to make sure that we are reaching out to many unrepresented parts of our community and not just hear them, but acknowledge them and bring them part of the process. As mayor, I will make sure that I work with all people and listen to everyone, because as mayor, listening is not optional. Thank you.
Go ahead. Well, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for moderating this evening's forum, and to the Ossining Chamber of Commerce, thank you for securing this location and welcoming all of our community here today. This is an important election for Ossining. There's an energy in our community. Our downtown is thriving, our schools are some of the best in Westchester. Ossining is moving in a positive direction, and I look forward to building on that after I'm re-elected. My vision for Ossining is one of unity and dignity. Tone matters when someone holds elective office, and that's true whether it's in Washington or right here in our village. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak about the issues that matter most to Ossining residents. So thank you all for being here this evening and being part of tonight's program. Tonight, I'm going to ask for your vote on November 6th. I'm also asking for your voice as we envision what is next for Ossining. The only way to do what our community needs is for us to do it together. And I look forward to working with all of you as we move Ossining forward together.
Okay, thank you. Is everybody hearing from all the mics?
A little louder.
All the way back there?
Louder.
Good.
Louder, just a bit louder. Just a little louder.
Me? All right, with these mics, you got to keep it right in front of you, I think. Okay.
We hear you.
All right. Okay, so the first question, which comes from the Chamber and League, really has as a background a national atmosphere, but it reads this way. If you are elected, what will you do to heal the divisions which exist in our community? How do you plan to reach out to your community to make sure that all voices are heard and respected, especially the voices of those who have perspectives that differ from your own? And we'll alternate, so Ms. Garrity, you're first.
Thank you. Since becoming mayor, finding a way to transform the way that village government connects with our community has been a priority of mine. And sometimes that means making sure that when people make the effort and show up on a Wednesday evening and want to speak with their public officials, that their voices are recorded and heard and can be reviewed later on. And sometimes that means letting folks know when and where they can find me. And sometimes that means sending an email and letting folks know this is what we're doing in village government, and we want to hear from you. But it's also finding more creative ways to go, not just tell people where to find us, but to go and find people in our community. We have a community that is largely Latino. My Spanish is not great, but people are very patient with me, and I do my best to communicate with folks in the language that is best for them. So sometimes that means I'm speaking in Spanish. And thank you, and I think it's essential for everyone in village government to speak in a manner where we are going to be understood, where people know that we are listening to them, and where they know that their concerns are becoming our concerns so that we can be acting together to do what's best for our whole community.
Ossining is a very special place, you know, between our diversity in languages and in businesses and socioeconomic status, renters, homeowners. I mean, there's such an array here in Ossining. The biggest challenge we have is finding a way to really know that we're really reaching everyone at their level. Before this campaign and before I even came on this in this role as trustee, I was shocked to bring up the idea of language access. 47% of Ossining residents speak a language other than English, and we were still kind of arguing about whether or not a flyer should be translated. You know, when people don't understand, or that affects your trust, that affects your mobility, that affects your civic participation. And I'm constantly being challenged to reach everyone at their level, whether it's through language, whether it's through a different way. And as mayor and as an elected official, I feel like we should already be doing office hours and you know, town hall meetings, but it's really going to places that you normally wouldn't go to. This campaign has been all about reaching out to groups and people that normally aren't reached out to, and that's why we mobilized so many Ossining businesses and residents to get involved in politics and unite to move forward on issues together.
Okay. All right, we'll go to audience questions, and I have a few here in my hand. The first is from a name I recognize from elsewhere on tonight's program, from Rika Levin. And the question first goes to you, Mr. Herrera.
Okay.
The village has held its own under the tax cap with a 0% rate increase. Do you think that will be the case again this year? And what will you do to achieve that?
So I'm actually very grateful that the village has been very, very good at making sure that we stay within the governor's tax cap. The governor created the tax cap because of obviously New York State's reputation and the fact that we are one of the highest taxed counties and communities and states in the country. You know, Ossining is a clear example of how to share services and how to be more efficient in what we do. But I think that it's more important for us to make sure that we continue that model. We have a new village manager that I have full confidence in, and her success to me is very important. And through our budgeting and our practices, and now going into the budget process, I feel pretty confident that, you know, we could actually do that. I think the most important thing, though, is to really educate voters as to, and I wrote it down here because I wanted to bring it, that, you know, the village operates 14% of each tax dollar, right? So that means that we have small say over it, right? So we need to work better on who really controls the pot, right? So that's the county, the state, the school district, right? That's really where we've had conversations as to where your tax dollars go, because that's really where you're affected and where your bottom line is impacted.
Okay, thank you.
This year will be my 6th year voting on a village budget. Since becoming mayor, I have overseen 3 budgets, the first of which was $315,000 under the tax cap, but there was still a small increase in the tax rate that year. But I'm very pleased that for the last 2 years, as was mentioned, we have had a 0% tax rate increase for the village taxes. And I welcome everyone to be part of the budgeting process. In just 2 weeks from yesterday, November 7th, the village manager will present to us her proposed budget for 2019. It will then be available to everyone in the community for your review. And the following week, November 14th, please join us at Village Hall, where the village manager will open with a presentation that will help all of us understand exactly what is in the budget and deconstruct the numbers a little bit so that they're more accessible for us and it's not just a thick book of line items. And then there's a public hearing. We want to hear from you. A budget is how you know what people's priorities really are. It's the same thing in a household as it is in a village. What do we really value? Follow the money and you'll see. So tell us what matters to you, and that's what we're going to have in mind as we make the tough decisions about exactly what is in our final budget.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, and this goes first to you, Ms. Garrity. I'm glad I did a little homework before tonight, so I know what this is. This is from John Van Steven, and it reads, studies show that the ETPA, that the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, causes communities to become less affordable for those in search of affordable housing, and that Ossining will become less affordable as a result, or I guess would become less affordable if this were adopted. How do you plan to address this issue?
Well, I'll just tell you, it has been adopted.
It
is now in the
I didn't do
implementation
enough
process.
homework.
That's okay, because it was a long time coming before we got to that stage. Folks who've been following that closely know that I was not in support of ETPA as a policy. However, unfortunately, ETPA became a very divisive issue for our community. And for good reason, because the intentions of ETPA are exactly what we should be doing in Ossining. The intention is to protect tenants and to keep our community more affordable. And those are the reasons why I encouraged the village to consider ETPA 4 years ago when I was first running for mayor. As with any important decision that we need to make, I work hard to learn everything that I can about all sides of an issue. We don't know exactly what the tax burden will be from the ETPA buildings as the tax burden shifts from the ETPA buildings to the rest of the properties in the village. But unfortunately, it's going to make Ossining less affordable for the majority of homeowners and tenants. The good news about tenant protections is that the village has reestablished our Landlord-Tenant Relations Council, which is now fully constituted and is becoming a valuable resource to help resolve disputes between landlords and tenants, and they are working to help empower tenants in all of our units in our community.
The Emergency Tenant Protection Act is a very old law in New York State that currently 19 other communities in Westchester County currently have. And as a person who's worked in county government for over 5 years, not constant, but in different time frames, I could attest to you the amount of constituent calls that I received about tenant rights and protections in cases. So Ossining was known and had a reputation for having some pretty disturbing cases, whether it's tenant towards landlord or landlord towards tenant. And unfortunately, throughout the years, now, yes, we do have a Landlord-Tenant Relations Council that I'm so excited, and I actually have to give kudos to my colleagues, Trustee Levin and Bazemore, for really bringing that up to speed, and I have full confidence. But ETPA is about giving Ossining residents the freedom to stay. And it's the only policy that does not say, you know what, we're going to need you to wait. And ETPA will affect close to over 2,000 people. And that's over 2,000 families that now have protections from evictions and now have a process to actually follow. And you know, I don't call residents who felt disenfranchised or not mobilized, I don't call them divisive. I call them getting involved in the political process for the first time.
Okay, thank you. All right, this question comes from Gabrielle Grambada and reads, what can the local government do when it comes to protecting its residents from ICE, ICE, without ICE having a formal immigration judge warrant? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, that's for you first.
No. You know, we're living through very aggressive and disturbing times in our nation where, unfortunately, the call for immigration reform that's been done for decades has actually taken a step back and has caused our communities to live in fear. And one thing I can say for sure is that no one on our village board wants any resident to feel unsafe in their community. I am very supportive of the symbolic resolution that the board passed before me coming on board, essentially saying that we're not going to be doing the role of the federal government. My only concern, and I actually voted in an op-ed, is that as a sitting trustee and as a city police commissioner, I still don't understand the procedure as to when Ossining Police goes to a door and what actually happens. And that's been asked by Neighbors Link, that's been asked by Hudson Valley Community Coalition, that's been asked, it's on record. So that's why when I was with a family that recently had a family member deported in their home, trying to make sure they had an action plan, I reinstituted that statement. We need to let everyone know exactly what is a step-by-step interaction of our police if they're going to be involved. And currently we have not provided that.
Paul, could you repeat the question?
Sure. What can the local government do when it comes to protecting its residents from ICE without ICE having a formal immigration judge warrant?
Okay, thank you. It's one of the most frustrating things for us on a local level is feeling how little there is that we can do to impact the policies coming out of the White House and out of Washington. And as my opponent referenced, we did pass a couple of resolutions. The first one was just a month after the presidential election, when so many in our community were feeling afraid in a way that they hadn't before because of so much divisive, angry rhetoric about immigration. That was the signature of the campaign that we have seen continue throughout this presidency. We later on passed a resolution which was translated into Spanish, and actually we read it right here in this room when the Ecuadorian consulate came to town, and it's framed out in the lobby here in both English and Spanish. But symbolic resolutions are simply just that. They're a statement saying, we do care, we don't want you to be afraid, we're here to protect you, we're here to help you. There is one tangible thing that we are working to do, and we were one of the first communities to pass a resolution encouraging Albany to allow driver's licenses for all drivers, regardless of documentation status. And that's a concern that I have become very involved in myself, partnering with nonprofit organizations and volunteers to encourage more municipalities in Westchester to support this legislation in Albany. My time is up.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is from Maureen Morgan, and it's actually two questions. They're written as yes/no questions, but I'm sure you'll have more than one word to say on both of these, all right? She wants to know, is there going to be a push for economic development, A, and B, do you agree that Route 9 needs to be redesigned? And that goes first to Ms. Garrett.
Well, if I didn't have a minute, I could simply say to part B, yes, Route 9 does need to be redesigned, and I'll begin with that one because it has the most tangible items to be able to talk about, and I'm delighted that Assemblywoman Scaliff is here because she's been instrumental in helping us move forward that effort. Assemblywoman Scaliff invited representatives from the New York State Department of Transportation to come down to Ossining earlier this year, and they brought quite a team of people to come down. And we were there with representatives from our village management office and our engineering office. And first we had a big roundtable discussion, and then we took a walk right to the heart of our traffic challenges, which is right down the hill, where Route 9 meets Route 133. And it was a really interesting conversation because all of the traffic engineers could stand there and see the dysfunction. And so I'm still optimistic that there will be some intermediate improvements on a path to much longer term solutions. And as far as economic development in general, yes, absolutely. Economic development is part of the reason that we need to reopen our comprehensive plan. And in fact, last year's budget included $250,000 dedicated to that umbrella of initiatives, updating the comprehensive plan, and one of the critical steps in doing that is clarifying what is our economic development strategy for moving our community forward.
Okay, thank you.
Route 9. I first have to publicly thank Maureen Morgan for her activism, her advocacy, and her knowledge in constantly bringing, Maureen, you've been doing this for us for how many years now? It's okay. It's a long time. I mean, we've been having this conversation in a long time. And I am very confident in our Assemblywoman, but I feel that we need to be a little bit more persistent and aggressive and really show the state how this is kind of paralyzing us moving forward. It is the gateway to our upper business district. It's also the entrance of our downtown. It is a thoroughway between a major school system, many houses of worship, and it's also in between our aquatics facility. I mean, talk about a quality of life and economic development planning disaster, right? So, A, what can we do as a village when it comes to enforcement and traffic control until the state reacts to us, right? We haven't had that discussion. And B, yes, economic development is a priority. However, we have to have the right staff, the right planning, and actual consensus on the board to what the vision will be for that.
Okay, thank you. All right, and this question comes from Susie Ross. What types of environmental initiatives have you participated in for the benefit of Ossining? I might add, if I could. And what other environmental initiatives do you believe ought to be undertaken for the benefit of Ossining? And that's first for Mr. Hurd.
Thank you. So, you know, I am a firm believer in climate change, regardless of whether you agree with me or not. And I feel that it's our responsibility with how we operate, and that affects our lifestyle. So, you know, I grew up in Ossining. So when you grow up in Ossining, family environmentalism, I feel like is really embraced in what you do. So Stash the Trash followed me 20 years later. I constantly organize, you know, community cleanups. I live on Main Street. The amount of garbage we pick up every day. I thank the team from Down to Earth Markets that helps me pick up the garbage and the beer cans. You know, because obviously we have a culture that says it's okay to throw garbage on the street, right? And that further leads to, you know, pollution and quality of life issues. I was on the board when we approved LED street lighting, so that was pretty exciting. That the village now has our street lighting, you know, in a way that's efficient but also saves us money. I was also on the board when we approved the Complete Streets policy. That gives alternative ways for people to really reimagine how they travel around the village. Going forward, I know that we're working very closely with Green Ossining, hopefully, you know, make the idea of composting and possibly the community garden at a potential alternative location.
I came into politics through a pathway of environmentalism. My first position with the village was to be appointed to the Environmental Advisory Council, where our responsibility was to review what would be the environmental impacts of proposed developments in the village. And then when I became a trustee, the first piece of legislation that I championed was beekeeping. In fact, it was my desire to have a public conversation that was different than a regular public meeting that prompted the very first Ossining documentary and discussion series screening right here in this room, and that was 5 years ago. And we now have the most progressive beekeeping legislation in Westchester County. I also served on the executive committee of the Northern Westchester Energy Action Consortium, which then transitioned to become the steering committee to establish Sustainable Westchester, which has introduced a number of programs that our community has had the opportunity to take advantage of. And it was through that role that I first became aware of the LED streetlights as an opportunity for our community, and I'm grateful to have championed that. We now save over $100,000 a year on our electric bills. Going forward, we are looking at electric vehicles for replacement of vehicles as they expire here in the village. And something I'm very interested in is how many more of our municipal rooftops can be more than just a way to keep the rain out. In the 2 buildings that we're looking at right now, one of them we're looking at to be solar, and one of them we're looking at to be a green roof. And we need to lead by example in our village by making the best use of our rooftops for our environment.
Thank you. Okay. And I'm going to get a signal when you let me know that we're ready to, close this. Oh yeah. But I'm just, all right. Got a couple more. Got plenty of questions. Okay, this is first for you from Robert. The question's clear. Dara, D-A-R-A. I'm sorry.
Dariah.
Okay. That's the way you sign your checks. All right. It's a good question, though. What will you do to protect collective bargaining rights?
Thank you. And we know that name. I know that Bob Dariah is himself a great advocate for labor, and so it's not a surprising question coming from him. And I have served with him in the past, and we've had many conversations about labor. I'm part of a labor household. I'm dependent upon labor contracts and collective bargaining to be handled well, both as a village employee and my husband, who is a member of IATSE Local 52. But when it comes to my role as an elected official here in our community, my experience has largely been initially with renegotiating the PBA contract. And I was very proud of how that process worked out. When I began as mayor, the police contract was expired. In fact, they worked without a contract for 1.5 years. And when I sat down at the negotiating table with our staff and with the representatives from the PBA, we looked at how did their salary compare to the rest of Westchester County. They were the lowest paid police officers of any village in Westchester County. And so we negotiated a contract that brought their salary up over the course of the contract to be right in the middle of village police officers. Meanwhile, they increased their contributions toward health care. So there was some give and take. It was a very well organized process, and I'm proud of the result. Now we're undertaking the CSEA contract for the rest of village workers, and I look forward to having great success with that negotiation as well.
Collective bargaining should really be a right for all employees, and that's something that a lot of unions are trying to continue to enable a lot of employees to, call and develop a union. I'm very happy to say that Ossining has a pretty good record with how our office of the village manager, we have to realize that in Ossining we have a mayor form of government. This is not even personal, just in villages, unlike cities, the person that's really kind of in charge of day-to-day operations and management and contracts is our village manager. So we kind of have an advisory role when it comes to that. And ultimately we vote on that process, and we discuss it internally in executive session to make sure that what is being proposed or what we're listening is appropriate and is a fair potential contract between a union and a village in this case. And I'm happy to say that in the past, when I was first announcing a village trustee, I was endorsed by the Westchester Putnam Central Labor Body. I'm also happy that we have my colleague and my mayoral candidate who's also endorsed by them now. So Ossining has a pretty good history at being pro-labor, and I look forward to continuing to find ways to work with our style of Ossining government as a village.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've had six or seven great questions from the audience. Thank you for your participation. We'll move to the closing statements, 1 minute each, starting with Mr. Herrera.
Ossining's at a stepping stone to really step back and determine who we are, who we want to be, and who we have become. That's really, I would say, the 3 questions that have really caused a lot of stir as to what's the difference between you and your opponent. So I'm going to go into exactly. So as mayor, I think it's more important now more than ever to develop Westchester County's first local municipal language access policy to truly enable all residents to understand how our government operates. Making sure that all publicly noticed meetings are recorded and aired. My opponent actually opposes recording public budget sessions. Working with our Chamber of Commerce despite having disputes and differences. The arm's length relationship that we have with our school board is not working. We need further discussion as to how our role of development in our future impacts theirs and vice versa. I'm open to listening and discussing to alternative points of view, and it's necessary for residents to be part of the process. Together we can be one Ossining. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for moderating tonight's forum, and thank the Ossining Chamber of Commerce for bringing us all together tonight. And I want to thank the community for engaging in this election process like never before. You know, the best part of campaigning is connecting with community members who are thinking deeply about what matters to them, about our community. And as mayor, I've worked hard to transform the way that village government connects with residents. But no amount of office hours and weekly walks and Monday emails can inspire the kind of thoughtful conversations that this campaign has prompted. So lastly, I want to thank my opponent for running. The 2 years ago when I ran, most folks probably didn't even know there was a mayoral election. So putting aside all the grandstanding and divisive rhetoric, campaigns force candidates and the community members to clarify our purpose and our priorities. It is my fervent wish that after this election, whatever the results, we will work together to move forward this community we all love.
Thank you. And now that's your cue for applause for both candidates. Isn't it wonderful to hear a civil discussion of issues? We'll have a pause before we get to our next segment. Okay, we're ready to begin again. If you'll take your seats. And so we're now ready to hear from our candidates for State Assembly District 95, Lawrence Julie and Sandy Gale. And they're from, I don't need to go over the ground rules. The timings are the same for as they just were. We'll begin with opening statements. We just flipped a coin, and Ms. Gale will begin.
Thank you very much. And it's great to be here, and it's wonderful to have such a large audience. I've had the wonderful opportunity to serve you in Albany for many years, and I've been there as a full-time elected official. And but although I go to Albany, I try to bring state government back to you through my town meetings that I have, just informal town meetings. Somebody had a discussion before about how do you bring people together. Well, that's one of the ways I do it, is to have just a talking discussion. I have town forums on very important topics. I'm going to be having one soon on whether we should have recreational marijuana. I've had it on single payer, and it's a way for me to judge what you are thinking as we go along. And of course, you've all gotten my questionnaires. So we just did one on recycling, and it gives me a real opportunity to find out what you're thinking about. I am the chair of the Real Property Taxation Committee, and I would say that the STAR program that was mentioned before is one of the areas that I oversee to be sure that the STAR program continues. It continues at the same rate that we've had before. And of course the enhanced STAR program and all of the other tax credits that you have been receiving. One of the other issues that we're going to have to face is the challenges from the federal government, and I guess we'll get into that maybe later on.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Lawrence Cooley, and I just believe it's imperative you guys get to know me. And luckily for me, I was born in this district. I've been in this district my whole life. I'm 21 years old, and Ossining, believe it or not, I hope the Cooley name still roams throughout there. If you were to look at Ossining and the #1 athlete, voted #1 athlete in Ossining history, it's Mario Cooley. He recently passed away, and he gave me and my family something to be proud of in Ossining. My mother lives in Ossining, my grandmother lived in Ossining, and I was able to not only get Cortland, Peekskill, and parts of Putnam, but I was also able to get Ossining and Briarcliff involved in my life. With that said, my family, actually, me running is nothing against my opponent. I just think we need to get new eyes on things, and we need to connect the younger and older generations, and I think it's very important. Actually, my family, when Sandy was getting started, stuffed envelopes for her when she was a Republican.
No, I was a Democrat.
Now.
No, I was a Democrat then, I'm sorry.
Well, this is my opening statement, so I'm just going to keep going. But like I said, my family did stuff envelopes for you, and like I said, it's nothing against you. It's all for the fact that I think we need to get new eyes on things. And do I get like 5 extra seconds from the interruption?
5, go ahead.
All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm also in the Army National Guard and an Eagle Scout, and I'm looking forward to serving you guys no matter what happens. I'm going to run again.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we'll move to questions. And here's one question that's from the League and the Chamber. That's how we're starting off. And that goes first to you, Mr. Chile. And this reads, if you are elected to the State Assembly, will you support election reform? Specifically, automatic voter registration, early voting and or no-fault absentee voting, and a single June primary. If you don't support those initiatives, how do you propose to improve the voting laws of New York State?
I think it's definitely important with election reform that we get the message out of people to vote, and with the election reform, I'm just a little nervous of what will happen if we get a lot of electronic voting, if we get a lot of election reform, because I don't want anything to be rigged in any way, and I don't want it to be able to be manipulated. I want to make sure that we stand on the core values of what this country was first set on, and that is to pick people by the candidate, which I've seen that we've kind of lost at the moment. It seems right now we're fighting over what party line you're on. And at the end of the day, I really don't care what party line you're on. I want to pick you if you're going to benefit the community. And with your question, what you said, of course I do support electoral reform, but I want to evaluate every single thing that would be done to the electoral reform. Not per se the things that are going on. I want to make sure it's done correctly, like I said, because if it's not done correctly, things will be manipulated. Last thing I want to see is people that are in the office and doing well to be taken out because of things that were changed, or I don't want to see people not get the fair chance to represent people of their community because of things that were changed. I think that we definitely need to have electoral reform, but I think that it needs to be done correctly.
Okay, thank you. repeat it, or?
No, that's fine. You know, New York State took a long time in deciding what kind of machines that we were going to use to vote on. And we didn't choose the electronic machines that some of the other states have. We have those paper ballots. Some people didn't like that, where you had to fill in the hole. But you know what? You can always go back and count them, and there's no manipulation that way. You always have the paper in front of you, and I think we really did a good job, and we really did evaluate that. A lot of other states are going back to that. It's hard to explain that all these states are starting voting already. They started maybe a week ago, and we don't have early voting. I don't understand that. We should be able to have early voting, and we have passed that in the Assembly. We haven't been able to get it passed in the Senate. Also, no excuse absentee ballot, which you probably wouldn't have to have in a way if you had early voting. But for people to be able to just say, I want an absentee ballot, instead of having a reason or making up a reason, you're out of the county, you're over the border, you're going to be sick, or whatever it is very, very intrusive. I do think that we need to combine the June primary and the September primary together in one action. We have passed in the Assembly to have a June primary for everyone, so that we have the congressional candidates as well as the state candidates all on a June primary ballot. We used to have that, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 years ago. I don't know why it changed, but I think we need to go back to that. It saves taxpayer money. It makes people be able to go out and vote.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. This doesn't have a name on it. Yes, it does. John Zeltzman, thank you. And it reads, what statewide initiatives or legislation will you take a leadership role in enacting in the next legislative session if you were elected? And what would be the benefit to the people of Ossining if such legislation were enacted?
Well, I think one of the biggest areas that we really need to deal with is ethics in our state government, but ethics in our local government, ethics everywhere. And I have over a dozen bills that deal with this. One is to be sure that we don't have pay to play, that people contribute to a candidate and then business is offered to have because you've given them a campaign contribution. That is a major problem. I do not think we should have fundraisers in Albany, because it's directly at the period of time when the fundraisers are taking place that we're voting on legislation. That is a real dilemma. I also think that campaign managers shouldn't come up and be lobbyists with the people that they work with in their campaigns. It's too close together. That is a major problem. But we also need to have campaign finance reform, and I'm a real big supporter of partial public financing of campaigns. And in that way, there are always debates. If you take public dollars, you have to have a debate. But it also is a way to get more people to be able to run for office. It is expensive to run for office. And by the way, I had a piece of legislation that was passed a number of years ago. You go up on the State Board of Elections website and you can find out where we have all gotten contributions. I don't think my opponent has done that yet, but that's what you need to do legally to let people know where your money has come from and where it is going out.
Thank you.
What have I not done yet? Sorry, I missed that part. Okay.
Well, there's a law, a state law that says when you campaign for office, you have to, I think one day it was October 8th, you have to send to the Board of Elections the people that have contributed to you and how you spent your money.
Yes, that was October 2nd, actually, deadline, so I did do that.
No, it's not up on the website, so I don't think you did.
Well, no, I did, because my first contribution was actually my own contribution, and that was $4,000, and you can look that up there. And I put my own money into my campaign, I made a loan myself, because I didn't have the funding, so.
No, I just want you to take the...
No, I just want to make sure things are going off correctly.
Okay, you got it. All right, let's take a minute and a half, starting now, to answer this. Did you want me to read the question again?
No. It was involving what would I...
Initiatives, legislation would I propose.
Legislation I propose. So just to go off, ping-pong off the fact that she said ethics reform, I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I know that she's a very big proponent of that, and I agree with that, because we are elected officials and we should be held to a higher standard, and that is that's definitely important. Another thing that I would want to do, and I'm not sure if it would be a legislation, but I know for a fact that this, it would be with the anticipated closure of Indian Point, determining a plan for what's going to end up happening for our future. Because that may not be legislation per se, but the people that live in that area are going to be affected wholeheartedly. And that is also part of the district, and I think that that would be very important, because the question also did say, how would that affect Ossining? Well, when people are moving out of Verplank, Buchanan, and District 3 schools, and people aren't going there, they're going to want to come here. And right now, from what I'm looking at, the Homestead Act that was recently just done, the condos are going to raise by 40%, and then you're going to have an 8% drop in homeowners. But the thing is, when the condos raise by 40%, people are going to end up, and townhouses raise by 40%, people are not going to be able to live there. So they're going to move away. So your 8% decrease to the homeowner's tax is now actually going to increase, because you're going to have to make up for the people that aren't there. So I'm trying to make it easier for people to live here. That's the legislation that I would pass.
Okay. All right, we'll start with you on this next question, which comes from John Van Steen. Many in Ossining believe that the community is being shortchanged by the state in the amount of foundation aid that schools receive. The burden is then transferred to the Ossining taxpayer, who pays the highest tax rate in Westchester. What can you do to correct that, to correct the way this aid is calculated?
So, basically you're talking about school tax?
School aid, state aid.
State aid?
State money to school districts.
Okay, state money to school districts. With a foundation? I'm sorry, I didn't
I'm not sure
understand
what the word foundation in that confuses me. I understand state aid from the, to education. There's a formula and it goes from the state to every district.
Yes. All right, well, a little confusing question there, but basically so I'm looking at it this way. It's very, yes, it is very difficult, especially in Westchester County, to live in our area. School taxes, I believe, are high. The one problem with school taxes is whenever you say you want to lower school taxes, someone always says, oh, well, we have to focus on education. Well, with that said, you could lower school taxes and still benefit your education. I don't understand why that's the #1 crutch that someone were to go to and say, oh no, we lowered school taxes, so our immediate thing is that our education is going to fail. Actually, I believe, and you can look this up, is that our educational system, not in Ossining per se, but in the United States, is fairly low. And it's because we're pushing people through school. We just want them to pass, instead of actually having them learn. So utilizing the money that we get that is so expensive, we're not actually doing that. We're just pushing people through school and hoping that they get through and get by.
Foundation is a real big issue in the Ossining School District and also in the Peekskill issue, Peekskill District, which I represent. And there are really strong advocates here that have worked really hard from the community up in Albany to try to get foundation aid increased. First of all, Ossining has a higher enrollment of students. It's increased over a period of time where many other school districts haven't. Also, many of the students that are coming have special needs. Foundation aid is about equity and funding, so all of our students throughout the state of New York have the same rights and advantage to a certain amount of money to fund their education. Last year, David Carlucci and I fought very hard to get an increase in foundation aid. The governor had lowered it, We got 884,000. It wasn't $1 million that we wanted. It wasn't $2 million that we wanted. Actually, Ossining is due about 14 million, 15 million. So we have to continue to work on it. It is a coalition that we're going to have to work with our assembly people, our senators throughout this area to get that foundation aid. There are a lot of school districts which are working against us, frankly, because they're wealthier districts and they're not as interested in foundation aid as we are, but hopefully we'll have major success next year and move the target along. Our only problem is if the federal government decides to cut back education aid and put it into charter schools, then we have another challenge ahead of us, which I had mentioned before. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My apologies for not being familiar with the phrase foundation aid. You learn something every day. All right. Persistent, and I guess it's Robert Pariah, right?
Yes.
What would you do to protect collective bargaining rights, I guess, from the state level?
Well, just so you know, I have been supported in this campaign by AFL-CIO, CSEA, PEF, and NYSUD, all unions that, you know, recognize that I have been a real supporter of theirs. We do what we can in legislation to try to help our unions, whether it's with certain contracts that we have, business contracts, with the state of New York. We're also fighting what happened on a Supreme Court level, where they are not pushing people into union activity. We in the state are encouraging people to join unions. It's very important. And as I look around the country and we see, and I used to be a teacher, but I see these teachers in some of these other states that are protesting because they make so little money and they have to have 2 other jobs to be able to live. And their unions really got out this time round and really worked on the state legislatures in their particular state to make a difference. And we know that working together collectively, you can always make a difference, whether it's a union or whether it's me working with senators and other assembly people cooperatively together so we can get the job done. That's how you make a difference, is pulling people together, and unions do that in a very positive way.
Thank you.
So, excuse me, unfortunately, due to my late entrance into the campaign, I wasn't able to be backed by as many unions as I wanted to be. I spoke actually to a couple, but by then their process was already done, and they actually didn't select anybody in my campaign, in my race here. They wanted to remain neutral, but I know 2 years from now when I run again, that they definitely would want to back me. And with that said though, with collective bargaining, you need to make sure that everything needs to be done fair. I'm looking at you because you wrote the question. Everything needs to be done fair and correct for both parties. Because if not, for example, something that's going on in Kent right now, Titan Construction. Titan Construction and Contracting, they came in from the city. Right now, from the city, they drive up, they get their job done, and they leave. A lot of pollution is being done, a lot of destruction to their community and environment is being done, and all they want is a little bit of help. The reason why they don't have any help is because they don't live in Kent. They just get the job done. Now, we need to make sure we're full-heartedly, head-heartedly in on our unions and give them the right support and make sure that when we use them, in return, both sides is done correctly and right. So,
okay, thank you. This is a question from the League, and goes first to you, Mr. Chioli. There is pending legislation to give all New York State residents driver's licenses, no matter what their legal status. Proponents of the legislation feel that our streets will be safer. What do you think?
does age have a requirement on that legislation? Like normal, everything?
Sure.
As long as you pass and do everything correctly and you take the test, or are you just going to get a license?
Well, I would assume that the
So
legislation...
you go through the regular process, and no matter what, you still get the license.
No matter what the legal status. That's the question, is
Okay,
about
so
legal
no
status.
matter what legal status is...
Everything else being the same.
I mean, if you're a part of our area and a part of our country and in our area. I mean, why would you not be allowed to have the right? I mean, obviously, if this is illegal and there's no formal paperwork set in place for these people, if you can pass the test and you're perfectly fine and capable, I do not see what would be wrong with giving people license so they can drive, so they can live, so they can do things that would make it easier for them to be in this area. Why would I ever be against something that would be against a person's right to live? That's the way I would look at it. I mean, I guess that would be my answer to the question is, that's what I would support that. Why would I not support it for somebody to be okay?
Thank you.
I think that's a really good way to look at it. We have legislation, which I'm on in Albany. Somebody else has the legislation. And it follows what Ossining has done. And actually, I got a letter from Mount Kisco very recently. So I guess the communities are saying, we really need to make sure that people can get their driver's license. The legislation that we have, and I worked to actually correct it, because I felt what we're not doing is giving a driver's license for somebody to go on a plane and do other things. We're giving a driver's license to somebody that is not here in our country legally, but to be able to drive. And they would have to take a test, just like we take a test, to be able to do that. And they would have a driver's license. I really believe that we would have safer roads if we had people that have taken a test, know what the signs mean on the road. They may have come from another country and they maybe don't know our type of transportation signage that we have. We want everybody to know that. So I think it's important that we do this. We've never really voted on it in the Assembly nor in the Senate that I am aware of. So I think it's time for us to get on with this and make sure that all of our roads are safe, that our insurance is covered, that we're all covered, we're all taken care of in case there is an accident. And I think that's the direction we need to go. But there is a lot of controversy about this, I must say.
Okay, I'm told we'll go to closing statements. All right, as we move along. And these are 1-minute closing statements, with Ms. Gaelic going first.
I ask for your support again to have 2 more years in the New York State Assembly. And, you know, I think experience really does matter. People coming and going to our state capitol that have an understanding about many of the issues that we have to deal with. We have sometimes 15,000 bills before us, so we have a lot of things that we've got to know about. Also, I think having experience, I've had a lot of experience in healthcare with my mom, with my husband. I've had a lot of experience in the educational field, being a teacher, but also working on educational issues up in Albany, which is a major, healthcare and education are the major issues that we have to deal with. And again, I think it's so important that I'm there in the majority, and particularly as the real property tax chair, because, you know, all we talk about are taxes and issues and payments and that kind of thing, and I'm right there, you know, to be sure that this happens. So I hope you will support me when you go to the polls on November 6th. Thank you.
Well, first thing I'd like to say is I only have a minute, so I'm going to try to make it quick. My grandfather wrote me something when he heard that I was running. And one of the parts in it said, if I had any words of advice which would be useful in any endeavor in life, but specifically in politics, I would say, work hard, think carefully before you speak, be polite and courteous, and control your temper. Never compromise your ethics or your principles. Review both sides of every problem or proposal you may encounter very carefully. Make your decisions on what you would do most good for the most people, not for a special select few. Don't be afraid to speak or do what is right. Make your decision based on the facts and your heartfelt feelings. If you do this with a sincere heart, you will always be able to hold your head up high. And I know that I'm done, but if I were to wish, I wish we were in New York to help and campaign for you and the United States of America. That was it.
Okay. And now is the time to applaud both of our candidates. again, we'll take a short break and be ready for the next part. Okay, we need to get all of you to take a seat again. We've got another vital part of the program coming up, so please take a seat. Okay, last couple of people. Find a seat. Thank you. Okay, we're ready to begin the third and final part of the program. And this is for State Senate District 95. Our candidates are David Carlucci and Scott Vanderhoff. We flipped a coin, and Mr. Vanderhoff will begin.
Thank you, Paul. It's District 38 for the New York State Senate, and thank you, Lee, for hosting this, and for the Chamber for hosting it. I'm really pleased to be here in Ossining. I'm from Rockland County. I was county executive there for 5 terms, elected 5 terms. And I decided to run for the New York State Senate, not because I dislike Mr. Carlucci, but because I'm kind of fed up with the corruption, the lack of transparency in Albany, and ultimately the failure of state government to address a number of key issues, a lot of which deals with corruption. But one of the key parts of this for me is trying to evaluate what we've done wrong on foundation aid, which was a question earlier. The foundation formula for school aid is harming Ossining. It's also harming particularly East Ramapo School District in Rockland County. And it's one of the areas that I think that has been a complete failure of the legislature and the governor to take upon themselves. The foundation aid for Ossining, just Ossining High School alone, is about $4 million off of what they should be getting. And the reason for this is that it has not been changed. The actual equations have not, the formula has not been changed in years. So it harms particularly school districts with a growing enrollment and with who obviously have higher needs. Unfortunately, the formula provides that all school districts will get the same amount of money regardless of the enrollment decrease or increase. And so those districts across the state are getting the same amount of money. It needs to be changed, and I think I would like to get a chance to do that.
Well, good evening. I'm Senator David Carlucci, and it's a real honor and a privilege to be here tonight. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and everyone that's here tonight. You could be somewhere else, but you're here listening to these debates, so thank you. I'm running for the state senate, again, because I believe that we have an opportunity to make a real difference. One of the most important things to me is our education system. And I believe that we have to stop the system of pitting property taxpayers against school children. And as was talked about earlier this evening, foundation aid has been a critical part that's missing in that formula. And we have to do everything we can. It's my top priority in this legislative session to get the adequate state aid we need for our children here in Ossining and make sure it mirrors in other districts like Ossining. We have to make sure that the aid that we spend goes to the right place, and we have to accelerate that aid to the Ossining School District. They've increased enrollment. We've seen poverty increase. We've seen an increase in special needs, but yet the aid stays the same. So we've got to make sure that we meet that goal and get that passed. We've got to fully fund foundation aid and accelerate it in the meantime. So when we talk about the most important thing is also affordability, and those correlate. If we are focusing on getting the right amount of aid, that will relieve some of the property tax burden. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to questions, and we'll start with, this is a question we just used in the previous segment, but it's really for state State Assembly, and Senate. If you're elected, will you support election reform, specifically automatic voter registration, early voting and/or no-fault absentee voting, and a single June primary? And if you don't support these initiatives, what do you propose to improve the voting laws of New York State? Start with you.
I agree with all those measures. I think it's extremely important. Unfortunately, in New York State, we lag behind almost every state in the nation when it comes to voter participation. So we have to realize that there's a correlation. We have laws that haven't kept up with the 21st century. Other states have a much higher participation rate, so the legislation that was mentioned needs to get passed. In addition to that, one of the things that I've been working on is to allow for 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote. When they're going to the DMV at 16 and 17 years old, that's a big opportunity. And we see that that demographic, 18 to 24, is one of the lowest turnout demographics in our state. And I believe that's a simple thing as well that we can do. We have to have no excuse absentee voting. The fact that today, right now, if you want to get an absentee ballot, you basically have to sign an affidavit swearing that you are not able to make it to the polls in that day. You have to have this excuse, and they have to fit into this category. That doesn't make sense in today's day and age. We also have to make sure that we have campaign finance reform, that we close the LLC loophole, that we have pay-to-play legislation, that we limit what contractors can contribute to political candidates. We have to stop that practice and stop the appearance that there could be possible fraud or corruption. So I think banning contractors that are doing work with the state from contributing is an important piece of legislation as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I'm for all portions of that. And the fact of the matter is, in this country, there is a declining number of folks who take an interest in voting. And what we should be doing as elected officials and as a state is to ensure that more people have an opportunity to vote. And each of those areas is important. First of all, the confusion on primary days gets everybody coming out at the wrong time. But I'll tell you the most important piece of that, in terms of the primary being in June, is the cost to your governments. Every time they have a primary or an election, it costs money to get people to actually have the ballots there and do all the work, have the people stationed there. So by having two separate elections, I can tell you from a county perspective, it's extremely expensive. Having said that, the key to all of this, especially in the early absentee, the absentee no fault, is you want to have more folks vote. And particularly, I think, young people who I think are being turned off by politics for some very good reason, I might add. They need to have all the ability to vote and to have an opportunity to do that. And so everything we can do as a state to make it easier to let people know that they can vote, that they can vote in a number of different ways, that there is one particular day for primary day that they should put on their calendar. Anytime we can do that, I think we benefit democracy. And if we're not in the business of benefiting democracy, we shouldn't be in elective office.
Thank you. Before I pose the next question, just a little note. I was warned by a member of the library staff that at 8:30 there's a recorded announcement about the closing of the library, which is at 9 o'clock. If that occurs on your time, we'll take a pause, we'll stop the clock, and continue, okay? That sounds worse than a cell phone going on. Okay? So, next question starts with Mr. Vanderhoff. And it's what statewide initiatives or legislation would you take a leadership role in the next legislative session if you're elected? And what would be the benefit to the people of Ossining if such legislation were enacted?
Yeah, there are three basic ones. I've talked about foundation aid. I think the formula needs to fundamentally change. Schools are being robbed of proper financing, and particularly here in East Ramapo and other places as well. So the first thing to do, by the way, it's not easy. The formula is complicated, but it's got to change. We're doing it the wrong way. We're sending money where it shouldn't go, and that's number one. Number two, the whole corruption issue. The economic development program in New York State is out of control. When $1 billion can go to Buffalo, okay, and it ends up, the biggest thing that happens as a result of that are people are in jail. We've got something wrong, and let's talk about how you deal with it. What you deal with is that you make sure you have a complete transparency of where this money is going, how it's being spent, by whom it's being spent, and where campaign contributions are going as a result. So how do you do that? You set up a whole database that explains exactly where all this stuff goes, who has gotten the money, what corporations are working, et cetera, et cetera. And the one thing you've got to make sure to do, which is not available right now in New York State law, is to now allow the New York State Comptroller to audit what happens when it goes to SUNY or goes to CUNY or goes to any of the non-for-profits created as a result of the loophole that allows them to do some of these things in terms of economic development. We have non-transparent system.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in a half hour. Please note that the computers will be shutting down in about 15 minutes. Please save all your work.
Do I have an extra half hour? No. The third, and quickly, is I am very concerned about the Trump administration's environmental policies. And I think one of the things we need to do is to strengthen New York State policies on environment.
Okay. You won't be interrupted. Great. Minute and a half.
Well, thank you. And there's so many important issues, but I talked about some of them before. Foundation aid has got to be a top priority. We have to get equity in the formula. We have to make sure that we're working. Right now, I see New York State as using its ability to stand in opposition to some of the policies we see coming out of Washington. One example is we need to pass the Reproductive Health Act in New York State. And what that would do is codify Roe v. Wade into state law to make sure that whatever happens on the Supreme Court will protect a woman's right to choose here in New York State. We also have to pass the Child Victims Act. The fact that in this day and age we still haven't been able to get legislation through the New York State Senate is outrageous. And it's something that we need to make sure gets passed so that we can have justice and we can stop predators from preying on our children. We also have to, some of the things that I'm working on, deal with domestic violence. I've worked with survivors of domestic violence where I've seen that the laws just haven't kept up with the 21st century. I'm working with a woman whose husband was convicted of attempted murder, is in prison, and is entitled to half of her pension. They've got divorce. I'm just giving that as an egregious example of some of the laws on the books that still exist, so we have to get real about that. The Tappan Zee Bridge, I want to name it the Tappan Zee Bridge, but also we've got to have a resident discount for Westchester and Rockland residents.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And this one starts with Mr. Carlucci. Do you support Medicare for all? If yes, why? And if not, why? Why?
Yes.
That's why they added if not why.
Okay, good. All right. Well, it's so important. I mean, we have you, if you are convicted or if you're arrested, you have the right to an attorney. But if you have a medical illness in this country, you don't have a right to a doctor. And that's something that we have to change the paradigm. In my office, as a senator, I often say, people don't come into my office and make an appointment to see me when things are going great. They come in and see me when stuff has hit the fan. And I've seen too many people fall through the cracks. Right now, the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States is a medical condition, a medical expense that hits you out of nowhere and wipes you out of your life savings and could put you on the street. That's a paradigm that we have to change, and we can do that in New York State. We've been leaders. We have the EPIC program. That's the Elderly Pharmaceutical Insurance Coverage Program. That is a supplement to Medicare Part D, something that I worked hard to increase the eligibility for seniors. I fought to raise eligibility from $35,000 to $75,000 income level. We are now allowing for thousands of more seniors to qualify for low-cost prescription drugs. We have to continue that momentum to be smart, to be innovative, and figure out a way to cover all of New York's residents and make sure no one's falling through the cracks. We can be an example for the rest of the nation to follow.
I oppose the single single-payer system, which is what I think the question is about, primarily because of its cost. The issue of affordability and availability of healthcare is going to be critical going forward. And I think there are other ways to handle it other than trying to have what essentially is a $230 billion outlay of funding. I don't think taxpayers can afford it. The fact of the matter is that your entire state budget today is 168 billion. So $230 billion added on to that just is not conceivable. On the other hand, the question, the EPIC program is a wonderful program, and there are programs like that have to be continued. And I must say that the availability and affordability of healthcare needs to be attacked at a number of levels, including the federal level. So while I sympathize with the idea of having healthcare for everyone, the costs could be too great. There's got to be other ways to solve the problem.
All right, and the next question starts with you and reads, what specific, I guess we all know the background of this question, but what specific actions do you think the Senate should take to encourage ethics reform in Albany?
Well, I think there's a lot of, there are many things. First of all, they can speak out about the failure of the ethics. Albany is considered one of the most corrupt state capitals in the nation. And I don't know if you saw the debate the other night between Governor Cuomo and Molinaro, but it didn't satisfy me in terms of how you solve the ethics issue. But transparency is one of the key things. Campaign finance reform is the other side. The LLC provides that people can provide money and give money without being identified, and it's got to be stopped. That loophole has to be closed. And I think literally going back to this issue of how we spend people's money, where the money goes, having a database to watch it, making sure that we don't miss a trick there in terms of where money actually ends up is important. And by the way, I think probably outside income for legislators, including senators, should not be allowed. That is employment income. So that everybody's talking the regular and straight talk, that everybody's not in a conflict situation. Among other things, however, I think that one of the things that needs to be discussed is it needs to be argued about and discussed more openly. And it seems to be that in Albany, it's hush-hush. No one really talks about it much. The corruption goes undiscussed. And the fact that it's your money that's being wasted. Your money, it's taxpayer money. When you buy it, you put $12 million into a video place in Syracuse University, or Syracuse, and nothing ever happens. You sell it for $1, it's a waste of money.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say there's a multitude of things that can be done to improve ethics in New York State, in the New York State Capitol. One of the main things I believe that we could do is ban outside income. Let's make it black and white and make sure that we end this culture of where people have outside employment and it can be questionable. And we need to end that practice. So ban outside employment. I think that's one of the first things that we can do. Close the LLC loophole, dealing with campaign finance reform. Ban the pay-to-play, limit or totally ban what if contractors that are doing business with the state can contribute to political campaigns. And one of the things that we had success on is, but it took a while, was removing if a public official was convicted of a crime in using their public office, that before they'd be able to sit in prison and collect their taxpayer-funded pension. That's wrong. We had to do a constitutional amendment, which finally passed. So now if a corrupt public official does something, we'll be able to strip them of their taxpayer-funded pension. So it's a step in the right direction. But I believe banning outside employment, closing the LLC loophole, banning pay-to-play would be a step in the right direction, but it's something where we've got to make sure that we're continuing to watch closely and continue to innovate in finding ways to root out corruption wherever it exists.
Thank you. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is proposing a New York Harbor storm surge barrier system to protect the New York, New Jersey harbor estuary shores from storm surges. What is your viewpoint regarding these proposals, and what are you planning to do to advocate for your viewpoints and to educate the public?
So the current proposals, they're pretty tricky. There's a few of them out there. A majority of them, I think, do more environmental harm to our river than do benefit. We have to get real about sea level rise in our country, in our planet. We've talked about it and talked almost hypothetically in the past. It's happening right now. In Piermont, right across the river, they have daily flooding. They've been there for over 150 years, certain roads that never flooded, and now they flood. So we have to get real about what are we going to do to respond. Now, that talks about the clean energy standard, which we have to stick to and meet. That's having 50% renewable energy sources by 2030. That's a commitment that I stand behind and have been working with our governor and with our legislature to make sure that that happens. But also, we have to plan for resiliency. And I believe that we have to start investing in infrastructure changes that will accommodate sea level rise. And I believe that we can be leaders in this. You see it in the Great Lakes, you see it in the Hudson River, and you're going to start to see it in Long Island and Manhattan, and Brooklyn as well. So we have to really be leaders in this. And I believe the talk should be about setting up a pool of funding for municipalities to use to invest in resiliency against sea level rise.
Yeah, I have a secret. I don't trust the Corps of Engineers. For years, I watched them make mistakes on flooding on projects in Rockland County. And I don't think it's malicious. I just don't know that they know exactly what they're doing sometimes. And so I would suggest that you've got to deal with the issue of rising seas and protecting particularly the estuary and our estuary, the Hudson River. But in order to do it properly, it needs to be evaluated by others other than just the Army Corps or the federal government. It has to be evaluated for a number of different ways. The unintended consequences of a bad design last for centuries. And as a consequence, I think any design that's developed has to be looked at from a multiple viewpoints. And I really believe that it requires the local folks and experts in their area to advise the Corps and to advise the federal government, ultimately to advise the local and state policymakers as to what a best solution may be. The most important issue, I think, in anything, as an environmental lawyer, the most important thing that I try to keep in mind is any policy that's created without a forethought has unintended consequences of some sort. And you really, in environmental policy and environmental law, and that includes rising seas, really need to evaluate it carefully and not react just with a knee reaction.
Okay, one more question before we go to closing statements, and we might as well hit a national hot button issue. What has the Senate proposed to protect our school children regarding gun control? Do you think there should be a law banning New York State residents from buying and possessing semi-automatic or automatic weapons? First for you.
Well, there is a law. The SAFE Act was passed with respect to semi-automatic. And while I am a Second Amendment proponent, there's a law that has not been passed that I think we should pass, and it's called the red flag law. Many Republicans are against it. I happen to be for it because I fundamentally believe that violence in our schools and outside is largely related to mental illness of some sort. And that if we have the ability as professionals, not we, but professionals who are in the business, to evaluate whether someone is a danger to himself or to others, I think that's a critical piece that we need to use. And obviously, my concerns are, as a father of children who attend schools, as we all do, is that schools remain safe. But the one way to make sure the schools remain safe, in my view, is to make sure that people who will harm others don't get to possess weapons. So I would like to see that, actually. The governor proposed it. It didn't go anywhere. It wasn't passed, but it's called the red flag bill, and I would certainly be in favor of it.
Thank you.
Yes, and I voted for and supported the SAFE Act, some of the most comprehensive gun control legislation in the nation. And I believe that we can do more in New York State and lead by example. The red flag legislation I'm a co-sponsor of and will be a priority in the next legislative session. We also have to expand the waiting period here in New York State. We can do more, and these are some of the things that we can do. We have to get real. The reality is that we've seen too many, we've become desensitized on the news. We hear about the mass shootings, and we don't hear about the lives that are taken on a daily basis. And so I'm committed to having more comprehensive gun control legislation, like we mentioned, the red flag legislation, expanding the waiting period. This year we did have some success in passing legislation that would be able to remove a firearm from someone that's convicted of domestic violence abuse.
May I have your attention, please? The library will be closing in 10 minutes. If you have any items you wish to check out, please bring them to the circulation desk now. The library will be open tomorrow from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Thank you and have a good evening.
He did say twice.
Yeah, gun control legislation is one where we can be models for the rest of the nation to follow. I believe that we have to be, as we're getting no response out of Washington, out of our Congress, from our president. We have to step up, and I believe we can be that model for the rest of the nation to follow.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. And we really are getting the heave-ho. But before we go to closing statements, I just mentioned, don't get up. There will be one more piece of the program short before we go. But closing statements begin with Mr. Van Hoff.
Well, I want to thank the League and the Chamber for having it, and all of you for staying here and listening to this. I'm a moderate, pro-choice Republican, have been all my career, and I'm pleased to be running, but I want to digress completely from the ordinary and say this, that I am fed up with the divisiveness in this country. And while David Carlucci and I have disagreed on many issues and we've had our arguments, we've conducted ourselves, I think well, and I'm proud of him. I really am, for the way he's conducted himself. I just want to say that I am so upset with the violence, potential violence, because of political divisions. I'm upset with the president, I'm upset with the governor. And I say this, we don't begin to be more accommodating with different views, we will not succeed as a democracy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I want to thank my opponent. I want to thank the League of Women Voters, the library, all of you for being here. And yeah, I want to use this opportunity to really echo what Mr. Vander Hoff said. And I think it's so important that, and particularly everyone here, that we demand ideas and policy from our candidates. That just saying the other person's worse than I am is something that really leads us not too far in the future. So, you know, I'm running for the reasons. I've got two young boys, one that's going to the same public elementary school that I went to, and I believe that we in this nation have to start to build a foundation that no child could go through. That we make sure no matter what school a child attends, that there is a floor, there's a foundation, and we build from that. Early education is key. I've seen the studies, read the reports, and time after time, if we can get in there early, if we can correct a problem that we see early, we can change that child's life forever. And that has a ripple effect that's so profound and improves all of our lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay in your seats, but give them a round of applause. What we're doing, you know that there's a trustee race for which it's not a contest, therefore they didn't debate tonight, but at the conclusion we're going to allow the trustee candidates to stand and be recognized. And in addition, the candidates agreed that Rika Levin, one of the trustee candidates, can inform the community of the death of an Ossining government employee. So where are they? And do you want to come up to a microphone?
No, that's okay. I don't your microphone. I don't want to keep everybody on top because of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Thanks. It's just very quickly. Last night, Mario Conti had passed away. He's been a town employee. He was really I'm sorry, this morning. You know, my husband woke me up so early. I just, it saddens me because I thought he was, you couldn't go by Mario without getting a smile. And the Contis, this is their second loss in their family in about 29 days. And I just wanted to bring that to people's attention. There's a funeral on Monday. It'll be a wake. It's all on social media already. But you know, it centers us a lot of times when we lose a member of our community, very young. That just wanted to say a word and a blessing to his family.
Well, I just want to thank you. I know it's a little bit different this time, but my name is Manuel Quesada. I'm running for trustee with Rick 11, and I just look for your support. So thank you very much for coming out tonight.
So, just from my perspective, I want to thank all of the candidates tonight. You voters here and watching on television, you have the responsibility. I go home to White Plains. You need to vote on all of these three contests. The video will be available on public access and on YouTube between now and Election Day. I want to thank Gail Marchica of the Chamber of Commerce and Jody Reaver of the Rivertowns League of Women Voters for their work in preparing this. I don't know as much about the Chamber, except that I know it's a community-based organization that does a great deal of good for the community. The League, as Karen Schatzel said at the opening, is an organization which encourages voting, educates voters, and works to protect the right to vote. Use your right to vote. Tuesday, November 6th, polls are open from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Make sure you use your vote. And thank you very much, and good night.